Hey you guys, important lesson today. I'm going to share two games quickly with you that I played this morning, and we want to look particularly at pawn moves. Right? I say this a lot in all of my videos. You're probably sick of hearing me say it. Pawns can't move backwards. When you make a pawn push, you've committed. You can't ever undo that. So we need to be very, very careful about pawn pushes. I would say more careful, treat pawn moves with more care than piece moves, because at least a piece move can be undone. You move a piece out, it gets kicked, you can move it back again, right? You cannot do that with a pawn. And every time you push a pawn forwards, you are leaving one or two squares that were defended by the pawn, no longer defended by the pawn. So, game number one, I'm playing with the black pieces, and I play the Scandinavian, and now my opponent plays knight to f3. Now fortunately I am aware of this. This is the Tennyson gambit. I do take the pawn, and then clearly the knight moves to g5. Now I've actually done another video on this, so we won't go into this right now, but I think the key thing with a lot of these is don't try and protect the pawn. Right? If you play, for example, knight out to here, you get bishop there, pawn takes, bishop takes, and then you can get into all kinds of trouble. With the idea with the, is it bishop takes, I think. Anyway, so white's gonna come down and try and capture this pawn with a fork, and then once his bishop's out of the way, try and tempt the king away. Anyway, it's worth knowing. You need to know about that opening. So the key thing with these gambits is don't try too hard to defend your additional pawn. That's what your opponent is probably banking on. So I simply play e5, knight takes pawn, knight to f6. So if we exchange here, I'm quite happy because I've developed my queen and he's got no development. So his knight goes all the way back to c3. Now I develop a piece and pin the knight, and we have a pawn move here. Maybe not the best. I mean, it's opening up the dark squared bishop, but it's shutting off the route for his light squared bishop. Now I castle, so early castling, develop my knight, he castles, and now I prepare. So I'm thinking what to do with my light squared bishop, and I figure that I want it pointing at there, right? So I figured that a fianchetto here would be as good as anything. And now there's a pawn push. Now this is a pawn push with a purpose. He wants to kick the bishop away. And clearly I can't come back to here because then we'd have b4 and my bishop would be trapped by its own pawn. So my bishop comes back to c5, and now another kick and my bishop goes forward to d4. Okay, and then white puts his dark squared bishop on the b2 diagonal as well. So far it looks like a very decent game. I know fianchetto my bishop, and he plays bishop f3 looking at this knight. Okay. So I then centralize one of my rooks. He brings out his knight, and this is the key move in this game. At this point, I was out of ideas. I simply didn't know what to do next. So I figured, well, let's just cause some trouble on the queen side. And I really didn't think this through, because if you look at the board, and if you apply the goldfish principle, what's undefended on the board? Well, that bishop is undefended. Bishop's defending that, queen's defending these. This is all fine. These are defending each other, that's defended. King's defending all that. You know, it's all... The weakness on the board is that bishop that I've just placed on b7. So I did consider, for example, rook b8, so that if the knight should move and bishop takes, I can recapture. Okay, but for some reason I played a5, and what this is doing is, well, it's removing one defender from there, but I actually am now prompting this next move. I mean, if I hadn't played that move, then b5 would still be a problem for me, but in fact, if b5, I could have played my knight here and defended the bishop with the knight, and there's no pawn that can kick it away. Right? But this move takes away the a5 square from my knight, and now pawn comes down and there's nothing I can do. I cannot save my knight and the bishop. So I decide to push my queen, takes, 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 takes. Okay, so now I'm basically a piece down. And the game actually doesn't last that much longer. So we have proposed exchange of queens, I decline, knight comes out, takes, takes, with an attack on the queen. I grab a pawn, bishop takes bishop, and now rook comes down to c7. So I did a video just yesterday called When Rooks Attack. Rooks love to be on the 7th rank. Okay, I grab another pawn, but it's too little too late. Right? For some reason, I took my queen away from the defense of f7. I mean, this is not a lost game. He's got a knight, but I have an extra pawn. I've got this one pawn majority here on the queen side, but my head wasn't in the game, and then bang, bang, checkmate, all over. Okay, and there you go, just one innocuous looking pawn move, and my position collapsed completely. Right, let's look at the next game. Okay, in this one, this is the next game that I played, and I play e4, e5, Vienna game, knight to c3, and a quiet d6. So let's just analyze these pawn moves, right? Again, like we saw in the previous game, currently, after one move, because he's moved the e pawn, right, which is one of the dark squared pawns, this bishop can come out into the game, okay? With this, but the light square bishop obviously is still stuck on the back rank. You can't release both bishops with one pawn move. But now with d6, very, very quiet move, he's released the light squared bishop, but he's trapped in the dark squared bishop. Very unusual idea. So now I develop a bishop, develops a knight, I develop a knight. Now the light squared bishop comes out with a pin on the knight, and I play d3. And this is pretty good because if you notice, my light squared bishop is outside of this pawn structure. Black, on the other hand, has a dark squared pawn structure, and his dark squared bishop is languishing at home still. He's not got many options. And now this is a strange one, right? Every pawn move, you have to say, what is the point of this? And I mean, here I could have played bishop b5 check. He could have then blocked with a knight, maybe. But why move this c pawn now? Because one of the things that it's doing is it's giving my knight this lovely d5 square potentially, okay? And now that would be an outpost because there are no pawns on the e file or the c file that can disturb that knight from d5. Okay, the only thing looking at it is this knight. So I pin the knight first of all against the queen. So my idea here is that I can now put my knight into here, lovely, lovely commanding position on the board. Now black decides to kick my bishop, and sometimes kicking an attacking piece makes perfect sense, right? But you have to bear in mind your king safety. So here, just look at my pawns and look, if you follow some of my games, just see how many of my games end up with a very, very simple basic pawn structure like this. This is what I'm shooting for every time, really. I mean, obviously there's lots of other openings and variations where things change. But if you're going to kick a piece, you have to kick it with purpose. And notice that after this bizarre pawn move, black's queen side is now not an attractive location for his king to set up home and retire, okay? So he needs to be more careful about his kingside pawns if he's going to have ideas about castling that way, okay? Now, so I retire my bishop to h4. I could have simply brought it back here, but I mean, there's dark squared pawns all over the place, so these squares don't look that much better for my bishop. I knew there was a chance of my bishop getting trapped in here. So indeed that is what happens, and now he plays g5, so he's now moved 2 pawns from the king side, and now there's no defense. Where's this king going to hide? Okay, and this costs him. So clearly I move my bishop back to g3, and he's got weakened pawns here. I mean, one other idea as well that I considered was maybe capturing this pawn with one of my pieces, either my bishop or my knight, then pawn takes, then the other piece takes. So I've given up a minor piece for 2 pawns, but more importantly, really opened up things on my opponent's king side and giving his king nowhere to go. I still haven't castled yet, but it's only move 7. Anyway, so move 8. So I move my bishop now out of the way. I figure, yes, I mean, it's got no prospects at all right now, but at some point these pawns will move out of the way, or something's going to happen. I can even think about pushing my h-pawn up, right, and then takes, and then I've got a very strong bishop on that diagonal. Anyway, so now we have a kind of fianchetto, but when the pawn has moved far too far away already. But you know, black needs to castle, and he's already ruined his kingside pawn structure. So I move my queen forward. This does a couple of things. Obviously, it now allows my king to castle long if I want to do that, and it also breaks the pin on this knight. So now this knight can happily move away. Not that it's got anywhere really to go because of all these dark squared pawns. You notice that because my knight's on the light square, it has to move to a dark square next turn if it moves, right? But there aren't any right now. Now we have knight develops, and now I drop my knight into the pocket on d5. Black decides not to exchange, but instead puts his knight onto h5, eyeing up this bishop. Now, what have we just said about this bishop? This bishop has no prospects. It literally cannot move. It's not attacking anything. It's not really defending anything. It's a non-piece right now. Okay, so now I take the opportunity to castle, and he swaps off his perfectly good knight for my absolutely awful bishop. And now I have a choice. Do I recapture with h2 or with f2? And I figure that because black has not castled and his king is still in the middle of the board, then capturing with the f-pawn just felt a bit more appealing, giving myself a semi-open file here that I might then be able to attack down. Okay, and now we have, again, bizarrely, right? What have we just said about this knight? Can't go there. It's only got 2 squares it can move to, and they're both backwards onto the back rank, getting in the way of the rooks, right? It's an awful piece at this moment in time. This bishop, however, has quite good scope. This bishop can do a lot. So why swap off a perfectly good developed piece for a worse developed piece? And what's more, give your opponent opportunity to undouble the pawns that you've just made him double. Bizarre. Okay, and still now look, I've still only got 4 of my pawns off the back rank, but the key ones here, my king is nice and snug and safe. Black's pawns, however, are just randomly placed. Okay, they are not working together as a team at all. So we have castles, and now I decide to break through, so this is a good way to use your pawns, right? You push them in order to break open your opponent's position. This has a very good purpose. Okay, takes. Now we have f5. Can you see the tactical blunder that black just played? I mean, why? Why move? This king was defended by a single pawn, a solo pawn. And black now decides, I'm going to throw that pawn up the board. Right? Material is actually equal. He needs to be thinking about defense and not about breaking through. I mean, I've got this lovely pawn structure. So is he thinking he's going to capture there and then takes? I don't know. But he needs to be making his king safe, right? You've just got to develop a sensitivity to the game to know what is important at this point in time. I blew it in the last game, like we saw. Yeah, I completely took my eye off king safety. Grabbed a pawn, because I'd just woken up, and fell to checkmate in 2. But what's the tactical issue here? Right, he's just moved a pawn away from f7. The king is in line with the light squared bishop. Now there is only one piece between the king and the light squared bishop, and it's mine. So that means that if I should move this piece, anywhere at all, then it comes with a discovered check. And a check is a completely forcing move. Black has to get out of check on his next turn. So I play knight to c7, attacking the rook and with check. So black has to make a move, king moves, I grab a rook, he grabs a pawn, I recapture the pawn, queen captures the knight, right? I grab another pawn, knight attacks bishop, rook across now to g1, okay? Why is this so threatening? Well, it's threatening because he hasn't got any damn pawns. The king is not protected by its pawns. And now we have rook in. Now I think about doubling my rooks, right? Always a good idea. What's this rook doing? Is it part of the attack? No, right? Double them up. They become killers. Now, queen here. So he's got ideas, I think, about moving the knight and moving the pawn. And I do spot this because my queen is undefended right now. So if he could do that, so he moves his knight and then plays like pawn to here attacking the bishop, but I figure that's not going to work, so I simply take his queen. So I kind of spot this, and I think he does win my bishop actually. Okay, so now it comes, right? So now, yeah, he's attacking the bishop and he's threatening knight takes d3 check, which would actually be a fork as well on the queen, right? So I have to defend this, and I didn't actually spot this. I thought he was going to move the knight away and then the pawn, but clearly not. So good play here, good bit of tactical play. So that's assuming that my opponent spotted this. So if I simply move my bishop out the way, knight to here actually wins the queen. So I actually have to defend this square. Okay, it's defended once technically by the bishop. So could I have, just wonder if I could have actually just played bishop to here, but then h6 and the bishop's got nowhere to go. So the bishop is technically defending that square right now. Another option actually might have been d4 as well, because then if knight to here, I simply capture the pawn, and then he can take my bishop. So that d4 might have been a better move. But in the game, I played queen to g3. Now, the other thing about this move is not only is it defending the d3 pawn, it's also threatening to take on g7 with checkmate. So the knight does take, I recapture. Simple. Right? Now the queen comes back here. And can you see the problem with this? Right? This is basic tactics. This is tactical play 101. Having said that, I don't think black really had many options here, right? The bishop is defended once, twice, okay? And it's attacked 1, 2, 3 times. Now, what this means is that if I take, right? So let's say queen takes, rook takes, king takes, right? But then rook takes king, you see? And also the king cannot actually capture. So this is actually a free capture for me. Okay, queen takes, rook takes queen. I've just won another piece. So I'm now a rook and a bishop up. So I don't know, could he have done anything at all in this situation? Not really, because the bishop's actually trapped. So the bishop can't go anywhere. If the bishop goes there, then queen g8 is mate. If the rook comes back, then maybe queen takes, rook takes rook. That's probably his best bet actually. I think bringing the rook back would have been better than defending the bishop with the queen. Another thing he maybe could have done is capture my queen and trade it for that. That would have been probably perfectly acceptable. But he is down a rook at this point in time. But this was a blunder, quite simply. And he's got 26 minutes on the clock in a 30-minute game. Okay, we'll see how the game finishes. So clearly the rook comes back because rook there, king there, and then rook here would have been mate. So So I bring my rook back now, and the threat is that simply rook takes h6 is actually checkmate. King moves to here. I push a pawn up now because he can't capture with the rook, because then we have check, king there, check again, king back, and then this rook closes it off. So king to here, and now rook takes h6 mate. And you can see from this game again that the pawn weaknesses really do just come back to haunt black. And my king was kind of threatened once in the game, but not severely. You know, I love it when my king has to play no part in the game because it's safe behind its pawn structure. This situation here, who wants to be in that, right? So the moral of this, what's the lesson? Pay double attention to pawn moves than you would for a piece move, and only make a pawn move when you've got a very, very, very good reason to do it. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for watching. See you soon.